All right, and we are live with Wrestling Bookmarks. We have an exciting show tonight. Before I introduce our guest of honor, let's introduce the friends of the show. We have Ian Douglas, who's been on COVIDCon and been on with us a few times, and Javier Oist from ProWrestlingStories.com.
Yep.
Appreciate you guys jumping on tonight. We're really excited to have Stephanie Kojima on, the daughter of Hiro Matsuda, obviously wrestling legend. Stephanie, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here and talk about Dad.
Cool. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with wanting to write the book.
Well, it started with when my dad was sick with colon cancer. He would tell his stories to my sister and I, and because growing up, we didn't know about the wrestling business. He was just Dad, and so he just told us from the beginning, from when he grew up in Japan to how he came to South America and then Mexico and then the United States, and tape recorded all of them. So then after he passed away, I transcribed the tapes, and it was partly therapy too, just to hear his voice and write the stories and just to have for myself and my family. And then I thought, well, why not publish them? That'd be, there's so many people that would like to hear this because he was so private, no one knew of his stories. And so that's kind of how I got the idea of writing the book. But then I couldn't find a publishing avenue. And publishers were like, well, you need to have an angle, or a spin on it. I was like, I just wanted to write his words as is, So I put it on the shelf for a bit. And then 20 years later, he got inducted into the Hall of Fame in Wichita Falls, and then the WWE Legacy. And I was like, okay, well, I should dust off the manuscript and, it's kind of now or never thing. And I pulled it out and started writing, and it just felt good, felt like the right time. And I was exploring publishing options, and I thought of e-publishing, on Amazon, Kindle Create, direct publishing. So that it just worked out that way. I wanted to, and then it was instantaneous publishing. Yep. And then it was out there. So, and it's been a great response. So thank you to everyone who's read it and enjoyed the stories.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, especially having the wherewithal to put that aside and be able to go back, from having it from 20 years ago. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it felt good to finally get it done because it was always in my mind that it needed to be out there,
Mm-hmm. So how did you not, how were you kept away from the wrestling business?
You mean, growing up?
Yeah, growing up, yeah.
That's just the way he created our life. It was his business, and he just being a heel, I guess, and being like he wanted to protect us from seeing him in that arena, and being Japanese as well, he kept his business and family separate. So I don't know. It was just the way it was.
Oh, that's cool.
I just want to ask Stephanie, did your mom? Do you guys hear me? Okay.
Yep.
But your mom Judy, right?
Yes.
She knew he wrestled, or that was completely in the dark, or
no.
Was it just that she wasn't given details?
No, she knew he wrestled. She met him at the Armory, okay. And so she was in from the beginning. She knew of the business and all the ins and outs, and she was by his side the whole time. I think just being his daughters, he protected us from it.
Yeah.
But what would you tell your friends and classmates that your father did for a living? Because it's one thing for him to keep you separate from it, not wanting to expose you to his heel antics and those sorts of things. But it's another thing entirely if you're interacting with other people to conceal the fact that your father is this villainous wrestler. So what was that like?
Yeah, well, it wasn't concealed. People knew he was a wrestler. I knew he was a wrestler. That was his profession. But it just wasn't ever exploited or expanded on or talked about, you know.
But your father, Stephanie, he was a pretty he was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was to the point and it had to be respected, right? He wasn't very super talkative, right?
Correct. Right on, Javier.
Yeah, that's what I was getting from the book and
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Now, what was he? You know, I'm sorry, Javier. Please.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm dying to know what he was like as a father. What he was like what he was like at home and with his family.
He was he was loving, affectionate, always there, very supportive of my sister and I and our growing up, and a devoted husband. I mean, I remember him, like, when he would be home cooking, he loved to cook. So that was one of his passions, food. I mean, if you've read the book, it's a lot about food. And and he was always, he interacted with my friends, and I don't know, he was a fun, loving father.
Did you have any, when you were growing up, did you have any sports or extracurriculars that you participated in?
Oh yeah, I did all sports, and I was big into dancing, ballet, jazz, tap, and he was always supportive of it.
Because I'm curious to know what it was like when Hiro Matsuda shows up to your dance recital or performances or anything like that, and does he get recognized in those settings? And if so, what happens?
I guess he does, but it wasn't a thing, like he was just.
When you were young, Stephanie, you were very young when he was still a wrestler. What state were you living in? Wasn't in Florida, right? It was in Florida. Okay.
Settled in Florida.
Tampa,
Florida. And we grew up here. He would go to Japan to wrestle, and I don't think he really traveled anywhere else to wrestle then, but maybe Atlanta or something. But we were mainly in Tampa.
Yeah, from the early
70s.
Like 73, 74, he mostly concentrated on The Office because he bought into the Florida territory.
Yeah.
So that's where he mostly based himself out of, from 73, 74
Correct.
Until around 87 when it closed.
Yeah.
No.
You're right. Yep.
Did you ever attend a show to watch him wrestle live in the ring?
Never.
Wow.
No. And
Did you ever ask?
No, he just didn't do it. I don't know. It was like this silent knowing, like you just nope.
Now, did any of the wrestlers ever come over to the house at all when you were a kid?
Mostly the boys he was training. I don't really remember growing up having the wrestlers come over, mainly the guys who was training.
You would have remembered if Hulk Hogan showed up.
I think I would have.
He didn't show up with crutches, did he? I'm just kidding. I'm sure that's going to come up at some point tonight.
I mean, we might as well ask it now because I've been dying to know what's the Hulk Hogan story. I mean,
well, hold on. I talked to Hogan on the phone 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And he brought up on his own that Hiro broke his leg. But the one thing he told me, and I haven't read Hogan's book. It's not like I've listened to every Hogan interview. The one thing he told me was that he deserved it.
Oh, okay.
Because because he was talking a little too much trash. He was flexing a little too much, and that your dad put him in his place a little bit. So with that lead in, take it away. What have you heard about the Hogan story, and what is true and what is myth?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons we're here, because Javier, after reading the book, he wrote the article about the myth. And honestly, I had no clue about, I had never heard that baby broke his leg, but he never told me, when he was telling the story. He's not going to tell his daughter, that he broke somebody's leg. And also, that's inside business, you don't talk about that stuff. And then after the first article Javier wrote, he asked John, my husband, if a couple questions, if I knew anything or if my mom knew anything. And so I asked my mom about it. And she said, "Oh yeah, that happened." And I was like, "Okay, well," but she's like, he wouldn't ever talk about it because you don't talk about inside business.
Thing is that when I'm looking for stories, the name Hiro Matsuda came out because that story with Hogan is just so well known, and he, like Ian mentions, he doesn't hide it. He almost, like, I'm not saying he embellishes it, but he definitely uses it in a way where he says, "Well, I paid my dues because when I started wrestling, this is what happened, but I returned, I persevered, and I made a career out of it. And once I showed up again, then I proved to Hiro Matsuda that I really was serious about the wrestling business." So he uses that story. And what happened with the Stephanie after I wrote the article, the book goes into details about so many things, but that incident is not as detailed as I would have liked. Let's put it that way. And I asked my editor from Pro Wrestling Stories, "Listen, I want to know a little bit more about this. Why there wasn't more information about it in the book?" And then he contacted John, Stephanie's husband, but he had already asked you, and you had already asked your mom this, right? Yeah. So it was like a little chain of yeah. But it's one of those stories that are just so embedded in wrestling history.
The one thing I do know from growing up around my dad and his training of boys, like I knew he was hard on them. I saw my dad work out every day, on the back porch and the sliding glass door, doing his squats, his push-ups, everything. So, and when I talked to Mom about it too, she said, yeah, he was like super hard on all the guys because, he just had the highest expectations and he wanted them to be successful. So he would put them through the ringer first to test them to make sure they had the willpower to make it. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why he was so hard on Hulk Hogan, to break him in.
According to the book, Hiro says out of 20, one passed all that training. Out of 20, one would pass, according to the book.
How surprised were you to hear how ruthless your father could be when it came to breaking in these trainees?
Not surprised, because I know and I knew growing up how hardcore he is and how he just has one way about him, he's so I don't know, hardcore is not the word, just solid, and just has so much integrity in everything he did and also expected out of everybody, including.
And remember, Stephanie, the way he was trained over with Ricky Dozan. Those training sessions were intense. So he basically didn't know any other way to train.
Right.
He only went by how he was broken into the business, how hard it took him to come to the United States and through South America and eventually going to the United States. That was the only way he knew how to work hard and to obtain your goal and focus. No one gave him anything in life, and he showed it
No, and he didn't expect anything. But
Yeah.
also when he went up to Ohio to train with Carl Gott was huge for him. So he spent 3 months up there with him, and his training was really hard. They would like run through the backwoods and do push-ups and squats and then wrestle each other after training for 2 hours. I mean, that's what he told me. And there's a chapter in the book about it, training with Carl Gott. So that was very influential on his style of training, of wrestling.
Now, in terms of your upbringing, I hate to keep circling back to that. I'm just so curious. And maybe in part because my mother's from the Bahamas, so I've got I think in terms of what she tried to bring over that was culturally Bahamian, and in terms of trying to limit to some extent American influence. Was your upbringing, in what ways was it traditionally Japanese, if at all, and in what ways was it not?
I'd say it was very American.
Okay.
Just being Japanese and having that, it was part of our life. But overall, it was pretty American. We had lots of Japanese food in the house. We'd go to the Japanese market, and
Your dad loved American culture. He loved the traveling to different territories, different states, eating from Southern food to, all of a sudden he had some Jewish food, and he was eating all these different cuisines in the territories he traveled. So I guess he wanted to, he naturally you would have some Japanese customs in the household, but he just loved United States living. It was his goal to come over here,
And why that was is he was born during World War II times,
yeah.
American occupation. So he didn't have much food. And I think part of his love for food came from not having any food. And also he told the story of being on the Japanese trains, and he was American soldiers. They had like their own private train, and they would always have food. They had candy all the time. They always had money. So he knew America was a land of the opportunity. So from an early age, it was his dream to come to America. And
he saw the abundance that the soldiers had, and he was wondering, what kind of country is this where I'm basically starving with my parents, barely making it, and these guys are they have chocolate and all these luxuries,
Yeah, and it was it was a good feeling, it was like, the Americans came here to help us, and that they have this abundance, and it's out there for him to go pursue. And then when he saw wrestling on TV, he was a senior in high school, I believe. He was like, this is my ticket out of here. I can have my wrestling trunks and just travel the world.
Yeah, he saw Ricky Dozan teaming up with the Japanese guy against the Sharp brothers, the Canadians, right?
Yeah, that's what he said. Mm-hmm.
Most people didn't have TV, so that was broadcast in stores, and people gathered around to watch that. Most people couldn't afford TV.
No, they didn't have a TV. It was in the train stations or the noodle shops.
So, Steph, what was his physical health like towards the end of his wrestling career? Like when you were growing up? Because a lot of the wrestlers now, they might be limping around from, obviously all the wear and tear on their body. Did he keep himself in good physical shape?
Yes.
It sounds like he did.
He did his workout. He would get up in the morning, have his green tea, the newspaper. It was always perfecting his English. I remember he'd have the newspaper with his Japanese dictionary, his English dictionary, and it was always up on the news, world news. And then he would go to the back porch and do his workout. And the same workout he did in his 20s, he did in his 60s, He always pushed himself to the physical limits.
Wow.
Always expected the best out of himself.
Whenever wrestlers are interviewed, like Orndorff, B. Brian Blair, Ron Simmons,
Yeah.
they always ask him, how were the training sessions with Hiro Matsuda? And they're like, oh man, those were brutal. Absolutely. He says most schools don't train their people anymore like that, but it just made us better. And just the potential 100%.
He wouldn't expect anything out of anybody he couldn't do himself. And he had like his elbows didn't straighten. He had his injuries or whatever, but he wouldn't let you know it. So he got
He mentioned he didn't charge anyone for his training, so he believed, look, I'm not training you, I'm not charging you. You can leave whenever you want, but this is the way it is. So that was kind of like the give and take, right?
Yeah, well, and also he could kick anybody out, if they didn't meet his standards. And he knew if they stayed there, they really wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Brian mentioned showing up on his first day. Buddy Colt drove him down there. He was all excited to get in the ring. He got in the ring, and Hiro Matsuda made him vomit within the first 10 minutes. And he vomited it was 2 or 3 straight days. This is going to be in Brian's book. I don't think he'll mind me mentioning this. Okay. He vomited for 2 or 3 straight days, and then Brian rolled out on day number 4, but he was smart on day 4 because he opted not to eat anything before he went to training. And he rolled out and dry heaved, and your father hooked his foot underneath Brian's chin and said, "Hey, how come you no puke?" And he said, "Mr. Matsuda, sir, I haven't eaten anything." And he said that your father just turned away, and he could see your father laughing, but he was trying to hide the fact that he was laughing at him.
That's funny. That's a good story. I could see that.
Mr. Matsuda thought he wasn't being doing his job, because hasn't he vomited again? What am I doing wrong here?
Right.
Have I gone soft with these boys?
I have to say I've learned the most about his profession and about wrestling after he passed away, and meeting people, and how it's just such an honor that people hold him in such great respect. And everybody has the best things to say about him. And it's a tough business, and it's nice to learn about it and who he was, and to meet people and talk to people like you about it,
What is it? What did you realize the level of the legend that he was? Like, when did you realize that?
Probably, I think in my teenage years more, because growing up, that was our life,
Right.
And we had wrestlers over, the guys who was training, and he worked out. But I think one of the biggest things when I was 16, I went with him to Japan for a trip, just him and I, and it was like the paparazzi all around him, and and people were, that's the first thing I was like, wow, he's like super famous, and he was in magazines and stuff. And so it was cool. That was cool to see.
Did you get to?
You wouldn't. I never knew it.
Did you get to meet any of the Japanese wrestlers during that trip? And if so, did you get a sense of the reverence that they had for your father?
Yes and yes. I don't remember who, but yes. Mm-hmm.
And your father owned, I think it was Eddie, it may have been Javier, but either Eddie or Javier mentioned that your father did own a piece of the Championship Wrestling from Florida territory. And 84, 85, 86, well, you have the death of Eddie Graham, and then you have the gradual decline of the territory.
Mhm.
When you were at home, did anything about your father and his demeanor, did you ever have a sense that things were going downhill for the territory?
No. I mean, my parents held things together pretty well, and after, Dad told the story of what happened with Eddie and championship wrestling, and he really wanted to keep it afloat. And so he worked really hard building talent, building the territory back up, paying off debts, and he got it going again. And then I guess the business changed from territory to more TV with New York, and he just couldn't make it happen. But
Yeah, go ahead.
But at home it was good. I mean, my parents were really good at taking care of us and protecting us, and keeping us, in good spirits about things. So,
Yeah, he mentions that he would start building up Florida.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, Crockett up in the Carolinas, they started using Florida almost like as a feeder system.
Mm-hmm.
So he would get people taken away from him, like Lex Luger, for example, and people like that, and they would send them up to North Carolina, the Carolinas, because at some point the NWA, the Carolinas and Crockett, they started calling themselves the NWA, which was not true. It was one of the territories that were still around, but they started picking the Florida talent, and they basically left them bare, and they weren't going to draw like that. That was, and he goes into that in the book. Yeah.
Yeah, he does, and I could tell when he was telling the story, like it was very frustrating for him.
Because he got him off. He got him out of the red after so many years of debt. He got him out of the red, and just for there to be inner sabotage between promoters, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, in the book, does he go into any great detail of his time in WCW? I believe it was the Yamasaki Corporation angle or something like that, where he wound up managing Nature Boy Ric Flair.
He talks about, but I don't think in great detail about Ric Flair.
Mm-hmm. A little bit. He was more trying to get afloat other businesses. He had either in Japan or yeah.
That's what I mean. He was an entrepreneur. I mean, he was a professional wrestler, but he was definitely a creative entrepreneur, and always, providing and finding a business to thrive in, and he would always come back to the wrestling. That was his. He always said he would. Wrestling was where he started and what gave him his life, and he, owes everything to it.
Who were some of the wrestlers that he was close with, that he may have been friends with?
Duke Kiyomoko was his best friend. Other than that, he was pretty private, so I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
He mentions a couple of people in the book, like Don Curtis.
Oh yes, they were close.
I remember him mentioning. He mentioned some Mexican wrestlers. Mm-hmm. that helped, like Rito, I think it was Rito Romero who helped them get into, I'm not sure if it was from Mexico to the U.S. or to Houston, because Houston was his first stop in the U.S.
And Duke helped them get into Houston.
Duke Kiyomoko,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Different aspect, but let's say one of the biggest rivalries he had was with Danny Hodge.
Danny Hodge, yes, in Oklahoma. That was
in Oklahoma.
Match.
Just imagine a Japanese wrestler showing up the local hero who was Danny Hodge. Those must have been incredible. There are a couple of matches online of that, but that was his main rival. And in Florida it was Eddie Graham, I believe.
Eddie Graham, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did he ever mention why he chose to wrestle barefoot?
That was his trademark. No, he didn't. That was just what he did.
No.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that he was very entrepreneurial. What sort of other business ventures was he involved in?
He did. I remember he had a T-shirt business with Japan wrestling, doing the wrestling T-shirts. Also, doing the videotapes with the wrestling. He was trying to get into Eurosports.
Providing content.
Providing content.
With the T-shirt, he mentions Misawa. I'm assuming it's Mitsuhiro Misawa, because if you just mention Misawa, I would assume it's that him,
Okay.
Because he saw the merchandise he was selling, and and it wasn't. He said, "Look, I can get you better stuff back in the U.S. I'll send it to you, and I could get better designs for you and all that."
Mm-hmm.
So he even try to get into like the tuna business, sending tuna from the United States to Japan. Different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So did he like to fish?
Not as a hobby, no.
Okay.
No. So I know baseball was his first love when he was a teenager in high school. So, and then he found wrestling. So.
When he was with Ricky Dozan, remember Ricky Dozan told him that you got to be an expert in judo, you got to be expert in karate.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm sorry, sumo and karate, I believe he said. And until then, you won't be a good wrestler.
Right.
And your dad wanted to prove, look, I don't have to be an expert at that. I'm going to prove to him that I'll be a good wrestler my way. I can. Because and that's when his trip started to try to get to the U.S.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he believed he could make his name on his own without having to do it, to go into a different industry to create a name and then come to professional wrestling.
Yeah.
So, and then that's how he went to Peru first, because his mother had a uncle there that helped him visa to go to South America. And then he started there, and then he went to Mexico, and from there he came to the United States.
And what was it about Florida that made him stick around there?
I think my mom.
That'll do it.
He fell in love, and so I think that had a lot to do with it.
They warned him, if you go to Florida, you're not going to leave, you're going to love it. They told him.
Yeah, he said he has a story about when he was in Texas, right before he came to Florida. A woman told him that if you go to Florida, you're going to get the white sand stuck in your shoes, the powder white sand. And if you've ever been to Florida, to our beaches here, you know that our sand is powder white and beautiful. So that's actually what happened. But he fell in love with my mom, and that was it. So.
Yeah. Now you mentioned never going to see him wrestle in person, but did you watch any of his matches on television during his career?
Not when I was growing up. No, I saw him after he passed away. It was just like you just don't do it.
Who are the people, Stephanie? Who are the people you've met? You've gone to the convention. I think Barry Rose organizes it with the Championship Wrestling from Florida. You've gone to at least one of those, right?
Yeah, just one. After I wrote the book, Barry Rose was very kind to have me as a guest at the Championship Wrestling Florida Fan Fest, and also have it be an honorary recipient of award, Hall of Fame award that they gave him a few years before, and that was a very interesting experience, because that was kind of my first experience at one of the conventions, and being around all the fans and also people that were close to my dad, and to hear the stories and the love of him, and it's such a neat, close-knit industry, and everybody's very passionate about wrestling, and it's super cool. I had a great experience. and everybody was kind and welcoming, and it was just great to be there with to talk about Dad, and Barry was more than gracious. So I appreciate his help a lot.
It's up with COVID. You can go to another one. I know he tries to do one at least once a year, I believe. I'm always kind of looking at his page.
Yeah, he has a good page. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's a good wrestling historian.
And that's the best. That's one of the best ones for you to go to, because those are all the local roots of your dad. And your dad was in Tampa for so long in the Sportatorium, and that was kind of like when people think Florida, a lot of people think Miami, but Tampa was the center for the Florida territory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and nobody leaves as far as the wrestlers go. It seems like nobody leaves, and people who you wouldn't think would be living in Tampa live there. Brian mentioned, I was on the phone with Brian recording for his autobiography, and he shouted out the window because he went to a car wash and Haku was there. So,
just walking down the street, right?
Yeah, or maybe he was getting his car washed. But yes, you have tremendous access to so many wrestling fans just by remaining in that area.
Yeah.
Now, Stephanie, was there any relationship with the McMahons at all?
No.
Like Vince? No. Well, how about when he got inducted? How did that happen?
Well, I know McMahon Sr. and my dad
Yep.
worked together when the territories were in functioning. But I think what's the legacy, Howard Brody, who was my dad's partner in business, he helped get him inducted into the legacy WWE.
Okay,
were you invited?
No one reached out to you personally?
No.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's my dad's business. That's his life, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting, if I'm understanding you correctly, I do find it interesting that it doesn't sound like his family members had any say in the matter.
Correct. You mean in his life and wrestling
No, in terms of his induction into the Hall of Fame, that you might have been watching and you see his name come across the screen and say, "Oh, I guess my father's in their Hall of Fame now."
Oh, well, Howard sent us a link and told us that was happening. So we were very happy about that. I mean, it's an honor, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, for sure.
And then also the Wichita Falls one, I guess it's Brick and Mortar Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, yeah.
Yeah. He, I forget his name, but he called my mom and told her that he was being inducted, and they invited us to the ceremony, but we weren't able to attend that.
It's Mantell, right? Last name Mantell?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there's a relation to Dutch, but last name Mantell.
I think so.
Now, what's your fondest memory of your father?
My fondest memory?
Mm-hmm.
The first one comes into mind when being very young, and we used to swim in the pool together. He would swim with my sister and I, and we would just catch on his shoulders, and he would like swim underwater, and they would play with us in the pool. Him cooking at home, he was such a good cook. Just and watching him work out, doing his squats.
Did he, of the things that he cooked, did you have a particular favorite?
Every Christmas he would make sushi with campio, which is like a squash. What is that, campio? A pickled squash and soaked in soy sauce.
Okay.
So that I always think of him with that. He loved chimichurri chicken. He learned that from Tito Copa, who's an Argentinian wrestler. He would make sweet steak, which was like a steak with teriyaki. He would grate pears with some green onions and shoyu or soy sauce.
Very cool.
It would make another Mitsuko, I don't know. There was lots. He loved to cook. So
He ate a lot of protein, right? He never gained weight in his life, right? He was just muscle cut,
correct.
always doing his exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Always, every day, even on vacation.
Did he that you recall? Did he ever offer an opinion to the relaxing of kayfabe standards or restrictions, or the fact that it became open public knowledge that wrestling was scripted entertainment?
No, I don't know anything of that.
Okay.
And he wouldn't ever talk about wrestling to us, or if anybody. I don't think he would really talk about wrestling to other people either. So he would.
The book was completed late 90s, right, Stephanie? I mean, the info before you started organizing the sessions
Yeah,
with your dad, the sessions with, it wasn't just one evening, right? There had to be a couple of evenings, right? Several evenings.
Over months.
Yeah. In his last months, right? Because he had cancer. Yeah.
We would make dinner together, mom, him, and then my sister and I would be there. And then after dinner, we would sit down and he'd have the two, and he would stream of consciousness, tell whatever stories he wanted to tell.
Now, whose idea was it?
My dad's.
Okay.
So, and he also has a friend in Japan who encouraged him to tell his stories too.
What was it like for you? Because I can't imagine what it must feel like to have a completed work, like more or less a completed book, sitting there was it in an audio tape that his interviews were sitting in?
I would think, right?
Yeah, tape recorder.
Yeah, to have what's essentially what is a completed work of your father's recording sitting on audio tapes for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Was there all those years? Was there something that was just gnawing at you? Like, man, I really need to do something about this. Did you get that feeling?
Yes, it was always in the background, but the time wasn't right until last year.
And from the time you started transcribing to the time it was actually published and available, about how much time was that? How much time elapsed?
I transcribed it. Right, he passed away in November 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I started transcribing right away. So that took several months, but it was like my times being with him after he passed away. So I could hear his voice, and I was typing his stories up without any thought of a book or, wanted to down on paper. And then I was like, hey, this is really good. And it would be he has an amazing life story to tell, not just as a wrestler, but as a human being, and so I thought about doing the book then, but I hit dead ends. So I put it on the shelf, and then it wasn't until March, 2018. I went to see a band play at this place called Skipper's, and the opening act was one guy with his keyboard, and his name is Billy C. Warts. Billy C. Warts, and he started singing these songs about wrestling. And I was like, what? This is so weird. And then my friends that I went with came up and said, hey, this guy has a book out, which it's actually a really good book. It's called Redheaded Geek. Sorry, I'm going to show it. It's what John's telling me to show it. But so Billy C. Warts. And so I had to meet him after the show, and I told him I was Hiro Matsuda's daughter, and he just was so honored. And we started having conversation, and I was telling him some stories, and he was just loving it. And then so I got his book and read it, and it's really a good read, and it has a lot of inside details. He was a manager in, I think, for Atlanta for a short stint, and he's very funny, tells good stories. But then I was like, hey, like my dad needs a book. So I dusted off the manuscript I had. And so that was March 2018. And I started editing it, researching the names. And then I still didn't know how I was going to publish it. So I was researching publishing. And then a friend of mine sent me an article about e-publishing. I was like, maybe I could do it this way, So I went on Amazon. Everybody has Amazon, So, and they have this commercial that says it's fast, easy, and free, So I'm like, hey, this is for me, and I can just upload my manuscript, and it's on Amazon, So and that was March 2018 to January 2019 when I researched everything, wrote it, uploaded it, and the night I uploaded it, the next day it was out, which was crazy. Yeah.
And that's the Hiro Matsuda story, Samurai Spirit. Yep, there we go.
Yep.
If you don't mind, can you elaborate a little more on the roadblocks to publication and some of the frustrations that come along with that? I mean, I've had my own. I heard stories from people who they've written 420 pages and they take it to a publisher who says, this is great, but it needs to be under 300. And someone has to lop more than 25% off of their book.
Right.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on the sort of requests that people had of you when it came to your manuscript?
Well, the main one was that it needed an angle. Like it couldn't just be his words, like the stories. It had to, and that was the main roadblock that I had. And then also I just didn't know really how to navigate the publishing world. So, and I knew it could be, I just wanted it to be like you're sitting down listening to him tell the stories. That I wanted people to have the experience that I had. So
definitely feels like that. It's like he's. Of course, I never met your father, but there's a voice there that's very tangible. I believe it's like he's talking to you, telling you from beginning to end. Yeah.
And then one of the things he also wanted to share is like everything. He loved wrestling. Wrestling was his life, but there was so much more to life. His experiences of traveling, his love of food, and all the interesting people he met. And then, his love story meeting my mom, and then, having a family, rising in the business, and then having to navigate family life with business. And, it's a full life story. And then all his ups and downs in the wrestling business. And then, his battle with cancer, and then facing his, I think one of the main reasons he wanted to tell his story was he was, facing his death. So.
Well, if you don't mind elaborating on something that is probably in the book, I'm sorry I get hung up on the personal elements, but I'm just curious. What was the courtship of your mother like when she meets this pro wrestler? If he mentioned that.
He does. It's a good story. They have his story from his point of view was he would go in the ring and strut around the ring, showing off his sexy legs. And then he remembers one day seeing this beautiful blonde woman, this lady in the blue dress, he called her. And they made eye contact and felt a connection, So then I asked my mom about the story, and she said she would go to the Armory on Tuesday nights in Tampa was the place to go. So she would go with her friends, and they had ringside seats. And she said the first time she saw him and they made eye contact, it was like she was intrigued. It was an instant connection. So then I think a couple weeks passed with her going to the matches and them having this connection. And then she had a friend who had an inside with the boys, with the wrestlers. And so she wrote a note, which is totally out of character for my mom because she's so shy. But she wrote a note saying, meet me and my friends at this bar after the show, and left her work phone number there. So, but he didn't show that night. But the next day he called her and asked her out. And they went out on a date that night.
See, there you go. There's one of the reasons why it's better to wrestle barefoot than with boots. With the boots, he wouldn't have been able to accentuate, his calves as much. Now there you go, sexy legs, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with
he was able to
thousands of squats he did, I'm sure he got the best legs out of all the wrestlers, man.
How many squats would he do?
Thousands.
1,000, maybe.
Wow.
Or 500 to 1,000.
That's incredible.
Yeah, with his body weight, like jumping squats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needed to keep his conditioning level high so that he could embarrass the rookies. Brian mentions how they had them like wrestle these 9-minute rounds or something like that, and he complained like that's absurd because in a real amateur wrestling setup you'd only go for 3 minutes max or something like that.
Yeah, 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, your father even at that point was able to put the young guys to shame.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Stephanie, do you still have the tapes?
I do. Yep.
Well, that's interesting. Have you thought about like putting those
on some for his collection or something, right, Eddie?
Well, I mean, I have a nice collection, but have you thought about putting them together and putting them up in
audiobook format? Audiobook?
Yeah.
I've never thought about that. No, I don't know. I mean, it's an idea. I just never thought about it.
I would assume some people would want to hear that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's amazing tapes.
But your father's speaking English, correct? And you're English throughout the whole tape. He's speaking English.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and some of us have never heard your father talk that much, so we would enjoy that.
Well, there's an idea. I wouldn't even know how to go about that, but.
Stephanie, how do you figure your father remembered so many dates and cities and what he ate in the cities and where he worked? I'm reading the book and I'm thinking I don't even remember what I ate for breakfast yesterday or what I wore to work yesterday. And your father remembers so many little things,
Yeah, my mom says he was a history buff and that he just could remember all the dates and places. He loved history and he had a mind for remembering dates and details.
That's a really good subject for any kind of book if they can remember details like that. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't have that kind of recall.
Yeah,
Your dad did.
He did, definitely.
Yeah. Stayed sharp.
Talked to him about history, any kind of world history, and he knew of it.
What was the most shocking thing that you found out?
That's a good question. I think maybe just how hard, like the first thought that comes up to mind is how hard it was and what a struggle for him to get out of Japan to and find his way. Because you couldn't, once he left Ricky Dozan, he was just kind of in a free fall, like trying to find his path to make his own way in wrestling. And then also during that time, it was hard to get a visa from Japan to leave the country. And he got really depressed at certain times when he was that young and had such a big dream and no way to achieve it.
I think he mentions in the book where you have to apply for a visa leave Japan. And when he said when they asked him what he wanted to do outside of Japan in the United States, he said, "I want to be a wrestler." And they laughed at him, said, "How are you going to contribute to Japan if you become a wrestler in the United States?" So he was rejected at first, like.
And then he had to meet a few people that had influence to help him get a visa. So, and I remember he was friends with those people all his life,
Yeah, sponsors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there was a question about what he would end up contributing, that's funny because he wound up funneling a whole lot of wrestling talent that he trained back specifically to New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Yep.
Yeah, he became the connection later on between WCW and New Japan, right? And with the shows.
Yes.
He mentions that he was a connection between the talent over there and WCW, and back then he was already working behind the scenes by that
and
time.
then the other shocking thing was the Hulk Hogan's leg thing, to bring it back to the beginning.
I think because of that story, people want to learn more about your father. That's the story that people want to. Who is this guy who Hulk Hogan always talks about? And many people, because your father stopped being an active wrestler around the mid 70s. He was not active anymore. If someone didn't go to a show, he would obviously wrestle.
Right.
But by the mid 70s, he was more of a back office guy, and as they say, the policeman, right, of the Florida territory. You wanna wrestle? Go see Hiro Matsuda. You had the Briscoes and to some degree Mike Graham to some degree, but Hiro Matsuda was almost like the last test before all those guys, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't be my Japanese wrestling nerd self if I didn't ask you if you know, or if your father mentioned it, because he was working for Giant Baba and All Japan Pro Wrestling at first for years when he made his trips back to Japan. And then in 78, he works for New Japan Pro Wrestling. He jumps to work for Antonio Inoki.
Okay.
Did he? I know he had a relationship with Antonio Inoki, but did he ever mention why he would have made that jump from working for Giant Baba to working for Antonio Inoki?
Not to me.
Okay.
I know nothing about that.
Okay, I had to ask because I was curious.
Yeah. The question is why he didn't work with Inoki or why he didn't work with Baba.
No, he did. He wrestled for All Japan Pro Wrestling. He wrestled for the IWE, but he wrestled with Inoki in the IWE. And then in the early to mid 70s, he wrestled for All Japan Pro Wrestling, the 74 and 75, 76, I believe, when he made his trips back. But then in 78, he wrestled for Inoki in New Japan Pro Wrestling. So since it was not common to jump offices in Japan like that, at least for natives, I was wondering if anything specific happened or he just had a stronger friendship with Inoki.
Mm-hmm.
I remember he mentions he had a relationship with Inoki, but it's almost like Hiro Matsuda, from what I understand, he was Japanese, of course, but because he made the bulk of his career in the U.S., I guess those rules, he didn't feel like it doesn't say that in the book, of course, that those rules didn't apply to him, but culturally that's not the way he operated, where you can only work for one or the other. Mm-hmm. He mostly knew people in different organizations who he was loyal to, not necessarily the organization,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But he was the bulk of his career was in the U.S., so that was right. He already had a different mentality when it came to wrestling business in that sense.
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons I think he just couldn't stay with Ricky Dozan. Very, very good training, but there are certain things detailed in the book where he just, we're not gonna continue with this, and he just.
Yeah. So Eddie, I just thought another thing that was very shocking. When he left Japan to go to Peru, Lima, Peru, he told his mother and father that if I don't succeed, you will never see me again. I will never step on Japanese soil again.
Wow.
So he did not return until 4 years later. So that's how hardcore Hiro Matsuda is.
Yeah, determination to succeed at all costs, at any cost.
And if you don't make it, you've lost your honor, so you're not going to go home.
Yeah, it's an unwavering determination, right?
Yeah. Pretty sure.
How would your father have wanted us to, if there were one or two takeaways from his life that he would want not just wrestling fans but people in general to remember about him, what would those be?
That he was a solid man, good character, hardworking, just disciplined, true to himself.
He was like a no nonsense
person
in his life and in his wrestling. Everything. I mean, you would never see him do some kind of comedy act in the ring. That was 100% real to him, and he had to show that it was. He just respected the business so much, and that's why he was very hard with the people who wanted to get into wrestling. It's like now we can say, hey, this big guy shows up, he's an athlete, and he's paying for training. Let's give him a shot. Back in his day, that's not the way it worked,
Yeah, it was.
Now, Stephanie, have you ever met Hulk Hogan?
A couple times.
Oh, you have? Okay.
I wouldn't say I know him.
Right.
But yeah.
How'd the conversation go? And what were the circumstances?
Well, one at his funeral.
Oh, okay. Fine.
I think our house. We just kind of hi, hello. That was it.
Did you ever work out with your father?
No, not in that sense. No.
But he probably invited you to say, "Come on, let's do some squats."
No, well, I would sit on his back while he did push-ups.
Oh yeah. He did more weight. Yeah.
So
a lot of the tapes on his training coming out of Florida, he would sit on the let's say Lex Luger's back when he's doing push-ups. He's holding Ron Simmons' arms and he's pushing his legs forward. That's classic wrestling training, but very, very demanding. Yeah.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
What's your favorite? You brought some. We see that you brought some pictures out. What is your favorite piece of memorabilia from your father that you keep?
My mom has his kimono that he wore in the ring, so we still have that.
Wow.
My memories of him.
Mm-hmm.
So I have his when he all the photo albums, all his pictures that he had a stack of them, and they weren't organized. So that was another thing my sister and I did with him when he was sick. We organized all the pictures. He told us about them, and we put them in a photo album. So I like to look through those.
Little by little, John, your husband uploads them to the group site, right?
Yes. There's
he has some good pics. He has some good pics on the group site. Yeah. Yeah,
on the Hiro Matsuda Stories Facebook page, there's photos, and then there's a Hiro Matsuda Instagram site that we've been posting pictures.
Is there any chance we get a second book composed entirely of the stories that your father's trainees have of him?
Like the other side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to write that.
There you go, Ian.
There you go.
Yeah. Maybe after this Bahamas wrestling book that's taken me 5 years to write.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk, Stephanie.
I did.
You did your part, Stephanie, right? You're like, I did my part.
But that would be a good collection of stories.
That's a cool idea, yeah.
That would be pretty cool. So Stephanie, what was the balance between how long he was on the road for versus being home, while he was still wrestling when you were a kid?
You know what's funny? I just remember him being home. Like I guess that's a kid's memory, but I talked to my sister about it too, and we both just remember him being there. But I don't know what the schedule was, but I know.
I can help you with that one a little bit, because as long as he was wrestling in Florida, this is according to Brian Blair, that every town they wrestled in or every city they wrestled in Florida was close enough that if you wanted to, you could drive home and spend the night in your own bed. Okay. And for the most part, guys did that. So if you remember your father being home all the time or every night, it's because he probably was.
Okay.
And working for the office and not wrestling regularly freed up a lot of his time, and he really enjoyed that. And he mentions that with his family is when he would mostly spend that time. Yeah. When he wasn't in the office and stretching the boys.
Yes, he was a very devoted father and devoted husband and family man.
Cool.
He was a great dad. I miss him a lot. Yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear. Yeah, it's great. Really great that you were able to, have the wherewithal to even, think about doing something like this.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel good that it's finally out, and that people get
Stephanie, did you ever feel that dreaded feel of overwhelm where you like have so much material and you want to get it done? Because I write articles, not books yet, but I sometimes feel that I got to get this done. And you had hours and upon hours of, and your dad, which is you're thinking, well, I'm the only person who has this. This is almost like a family treasure, like a responsibility,
Yeah, absolutely. And then just, it was back and forth going like, I got to do this. And like, well, I don't know how to do it. And maybe it's not necessary to do it because he was so private, But then in the end, I just knew it had to be published, and his story has to be told, not only because of wrestler, but because of the life he lived. And it's just an amazing life story.
The day I finished Bugsy McGraw's book, Kenny Casanova sent me a message and said, "Good for you and well done because you immortalized him." And I think there was plenty of footage of Bugsy. He immortalized himself, but you helped to immortalize your father, and you should be very proud of that.
Thank you. And I have to say, I enjoyed when I was doing the research and looking up all the names in his book, because I wanted to get them as right as possible. Like just seeing all the legends and all the wrestlers and just the lives that they've lived, and it was amazing. So, and I learned a lot. So I respect the profession, and it's pretty incredible.
So, are you going to will you be going to the conventions when they're back up to, to sign books or sell books or however you're getting them out there?
Oh, I haven't thought about that. I don't know. It's a little.
I'm sure it'd be a great response.
Yeah.
Well, tonight's a good step for you.
This is a good step. Because I always it's about my dad. It's not about me. So, but you never
thought about this endeavor as, hey, I want to make money. I want to make money selling books of my dad. I mean, I could tell that it was more of, this is to honor him.
Yeah.
Not to let's cash in on my dad's career.
No, I didn't even think about the after effect. I was just on a mission to get it out. And then once it was out, I was like, whoa, wow, this is this is happening. This is a big deal. A lot of people are interested. And
when you got your first when you got your first copy,
that was
how'd
so
that
good.
feel?
It was so good. Mhm.
Now, would he have crossed paths with Rocky Johnson at all?
I don't know.
Javier, would you have known that? Would you know that?
I don't believe it's mentioned in the book. He crossed paths with a lot of guys who helped him out. Some of them are well known, others aren't. But that's what makes the book interesting, in my opinion, because there's a lot of little names where I start looking them up online. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know about this guy. And then all of a sudden you get bigger names. So he knew different levels of wrestlers in the business, big names and others.
Yep.
But let's say some guys were very regional. Some guys were very well known in like Texas and Houston and the Southeast, but not necessarily like New York or the East Coast. So because you and me or anyone doesn't recognize a guy, there's certain people that remember that guy. Like, oh man, my parents used to watch that guy when we used to go to shows in whatever, Texas or So that it's like a potpourri. The book is like a potpourri. Doesn't it's not like only up in New York or only in Florida, only West Coast or Texas, or he kind of maps out his life from Japan to going into the United States eventually, and the different territories and the foods and all his little stories. It definitely is a book of his stories. Not just wrestling, just different stories of his life.
Right.
That's cool. All right, Stephanie. Well, we'll let you get out of here. Where can people find the book? People who are interested.
Amazon.com. The Hiro Matsuda stories.
Okay. And they in the Facebook group is what again?
The Hiro Matsuda stories.
Okay. Cool. Well, I'll tell you, for me, it was an absolute honor to have you on tonight to talk about your father, the legend Hiro Matsuda, and I hope people are going to go out and get the book and read the stories and be able to just learn more about him.
Thank you. Oh, and I have to say one really cool thing that's come from the book is I've had friends and people tell me that they wanted to talk to their parents and get their stories, and also parents saying that, oh, I want to record my stories for my kids. So that's why it's not just a book about wrestling. It's about human life, and everybody has a story to tell, and it should be recorded and shared.
Agreed.
Yeah. So thank you. I mean, this has been and I've really enjoyed talking about Dad and learning more too. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Stephanie, it was an honor to meet you. Javier, you too.
Thank you, Javier, for hooking us up.
All right, Stephanie. Nice meeting you finally.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
All right, take care, guys.
All right. Bye.